The envelope in Barbara Henderson's weathered hands held more than paper and ink. It held 30 years of love, 47 children's dreams, and one woman's final act of defiance against a disease that was stealing her memories but couldn't touch her heart. At 65, with silver hair that caught the studio lights like spun moonlight and eyes that still sparkled with the warmth that had welcomed countless frightened children into safety, Barbara sat in the guest chair of the Oprah Winfrey Show, preparing to give the most important gift of her life. The studios of Harpo Productions buzzed with their usual Tuesday afternoon energy. Golden lights painted the familiar burgundy, and cream set in warm hues that had become synonymous with hope and transformation across America. 300 audience members filled the tiered seating, their faces bright with anticipation for another episode that would remind them why human stories matter most. Behind the cameras, producers whispered into headsets, while sound technicians fine-tuned levels and lighting directors adjusted the welcoming glow that made this space feel like America's living room. Oprah Winfrey sat in her signature chair, radiant in a deep plum silk blouse that complemented her regal bearing. Her presence filled the studio with that unique combination of authority and maternal warmth that had made her the most trusted voice in American media for over 2 decades. Today's show was dedicated to unsung heroes, a special episode highlighting people who had quietly changed the world one life at a time. But Barbara Henderson carried a secret that would transform this celebration into something far more profound. 3 months ago, she had received a diagnosis that changed everything: early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The irony wasn't lost on her. A woman who had spent 30 years helping children remember they were loved was now facing a future where she might forget the faces that had given her life meaning. Barbara had been fostering children since 1994, when her own daughter Lisa was killed by a drunk driver at age 16. The grief had nearly destroyed her marriage to Robert, her husband of 22 years. They had tried to have more children, but Barbara's body, broken by sorrow, couldn't carry another pregnancy to term. The doctors spoke of medical reasons, but Barbara knew the truth. Her heart was too shattered to nurture new life. That's when social worker Margaret Chen had appeared at their door with a proposition that seemed impossible. Would they consider fostering children who needed temporary homes, children whose own hearts were shattered, who needed someone to show them that love could exist even in the midst of loss? Robert had been skeptical. How could they heal broken children when they couldn't heal themselves? But Barbara had seen something in Margaret's eyes, a recognition of shared pain, understanding that sometimes the people best equipped to mend others are those who know what it means to be broken. Their first foster child was 8-year-old Marcus, a boy whose mother had died of cancer and whose father had simply disappeared one morning, leaving him with neighbors who couldn't afford another mouth to feed. Marcus arrived with 2 garbage bags of clothes, and a silence so profound it seemed to fill their entire house. For 3 weeks, Marcus didn't speak. He ate the meals Barbara prepared, attended the school she enrolled him in, and slept in the room she had decorated with care. But he existed in their home like a ghost of childhood, rather than a living boy. Robert began to whisper that maybe they weren't cut out for this, that maybe their own grief was too fresh to help carry someone else's. But Barbara remembered something her own mother had told her years ago. Love isn't something you feel, honey. Love is something you do, especially when you don't feel like doing it. So Barbara kept doing love. She packed Marcus lunches with handwritten notes, even though he never acknowledged them. She sat with him during thunderstorms when he trembled but wouldn't cry. She read him bedtime stories even though he stared at the ceiling with eyes that seemed too old for his young face. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday evening in November. Barbara was making dinner when she heard a sound from the living room, soft, broken sobbing that seemed to come from someplace deeper than tears. She found Marcus on the couch, holding a photograph that had fallen from one of his garbage bags. It was a picture of him with his mother, both of them laughing at some forgotten joke, both of them alive and whole and unaware that cancer was already growing in cells that would steal their future together. Barbara sat beside Marcus and, without asking permission, put her arms around him. For the first time in 3 weeks, he didn't pull away. Instead, he leaned into her embrace and whispered the first words he had spoken in their home. "I miss her so much it hurts to breathe." "I know," Barbara whispered back. "I know exactly how that feels." That night, Barbara and Marcus shared their stories of loss. She told him about Lisa, about the accident, about the grief that felt like drowning in slow motion. He told her about watching his mother fade away, about being afraid to love anyone else because losing people hurt too much to survive. "But here's what I learned," Barbara said, brushing tears from both their faces. "The hurt doesn't go away, but it changes. It stops being something that destroys you and starts being something that connects you to other people who hurt. It becomes a bridge instead of a wall." Marcus stayed with them for 8 months before being reunited with relatives in California. When he left, he hugged Barbara with a fierceness that spoke of attachment finally risked and received. "You saved me," he whispered. "No, sweetheart," Barbara replied. "We saved each other." That was the beginning of 30 years of saving each other. 47 children passed through the Henderson home, some for weeks, some for years, some who returned as adults with children of their own. Barbara learned that fostering wasn't about providing temporary care for children in crisis. It was about creating a place where love could happen despite impermanence, where healing could begin even when endings were uncertain. There was Sarah, age 12, who had been sexually abused by her stepfather and didn't trust any adult to keep her safe. Barbara spent 2 years proving that safety existed, that not all adults were predators, that her body belonged to her and her future held possibilities beyond survival. There was Miguel, age 4, whose mother had abandoned him at a bus station with a note pinned to his shirt. He spoke only Spanish and cried for mommy every night for months. Barbara learned Spanish, found him books in his native language, and slowly helped him understand that love could exist in multiple languages. There was teenage twins, Jessica and Jennifer, whose parents had died in a house fire. They arrived angry and defensive, convinced that any attachment would lead to more loss. Barbara gave them space to grieve, time to heal, and proof that love could coexist with sorrow. Each child taught Barbara something new about resilience, about the human capacity to heal, about the way broken hearts could expand to hold more love rather than less. Robert, initially reluctant, became the father figure many of these children had never known, teaching boys how to throw footballs and change tires, showing girls that men could be safe and trustworthy. The Henderson home became known throughout the foster care system as a place where healing happened. Social workers requested Barbara specifically for their most challenging cases. Children who had been through multiple placements, children who had given up on the possibility of love, children who needed someone with enough patience to wait for trust to grow. But Barbara's greatest success story was also her most complicated one. James Rodriguez had arrived when he was 7 years old, a boy whose mother had died of a drug overdose and whose father was serving time for armed robbery. James had been in 6 foster homes in 3 years, each placement ending when his behavioral problems became more than his caregivers could handle. James came to the Hendersons with a reputation for violence, for destruction, for an anger so profound it seemed to consume everything around him. His file was thick with incident reports, destroyed property, fights with other children, explosive tantrums that required physical restraint. But Barbara saw something different when she looked at James. She saw a boy whose rage was really grief, whose violence was really fear, whose destructive impulses were really desperate attempts to control a world that had never felt safe. "He's going to test you," Margaret Chen warned. "He's going to push every boundary, break every rule, try to prove that you'll give up on him like everyone else has." "Then I guess I'll have to prove him wrong," Barbara replied. The testing began immediately. James destroyed his bedroom. On the first night, tearing posters from walls and overturning furniture, Barbara cleaned it up without comment and replaced everything exactly as it had been. He ran away 3 times in the first month. Each time, Barbara and Robert searched until they found him, brought him home, and welcomed him back without punishment or lectures. The breakthrough came during James's 4th month with them. Barbara found him in the backyard at midnight, sitting under the old oak tree and crying with the kind of desperation that only comes from the deepest places of loss. "I killed her," he whispered when Barbara sat beside him. "I killed my mama." The story came out in fragments over the next hour. The night his mother died, 7-year-old James had hidden her drugs because he was afraid of what they were doing to her. In her desperation to find them, she had taken pills from a different dealer, pills that were laced with fentanyl. She died on the bathroom floor while James slept, and he had carried the guilt of her death for 3 years. "James," Barbara said gently, "you were 7 years old. 7-year-olds don't kill their mothers. 7-year-olds try to save their mothers, which is exactly what you were doing." That night marked the beginning of James's real healing. The rage didn't disappear overnight, but it began to transform into something else: determination, protectiveness, fierce loyalty to the family that had refused to give up on him. James stayed with the Hendersons for 8 years, longer than any other child. He called them Mom and Dad, legally changed his last name to Henderson, and became the big brother figure for every child who came after him. When he graduated high school as valedictorian, his speech began with the words, "I am here today because 2 people refused to believe that broken meant unfixable." James was now 25, a pediatric resident at Chicago Children's Hospital, engaged to a fellow doctor named Maria, and planning to adopt children from the foster care system himself. He was Barbara's proudest achievement and her deepest love, the child who had taught her that the most damaged children often become the most compassionate adults. But Alzheimer's was threatening to steal even that memory. The diagnosis had come after months of small lapses, forgetting appointments, misplacing keys, struggling to remember names of children she had loved for decades. The doctor had been gentle but clear. Early intervention could slow the progression. But there was no cure, no way to stop the inevitable erosion of everything that made Barbara who she was. The worst part wasn't the fear of forgetting. The worst part was the knowledge that 47 children would lose the one person who held their stories, who remembered their struggles and celebrated their victories, who had been the constant thread connecting their painful pasts to their hopeful futures. That's what had brought Barbara to Oprah's show today. The producers had selected the Henderson family as part of their Unsung Heroes special, highlighting people who had quietly changed the world one life at a time. They knew about the 30 years of fostering, the 47 children, the countless lives transformed. What they didn't know was that this would be Barbara's farewell, her final opportunity to speak for the children who had taught her that love multiplied when it was shared. The show's first segments had gone smoothly. Oprah had interviewed a teacher who had revolutionized literacy programs, a nurse who had developed innovative trauma treatments, and a social worker who had transformed family reunification services. Each story was inspiring, each guest deserving of recognition. The audience responded with warmth and enthusiasm. But as Barbara's segment approached, something shifted in the studio's energy. Perhaps it was the way she clutched that envelope with trembling hands, or the way her eyes held a mixture of love and loss that seemed too profound for a celebration. Oprah, with the intuition that had made her America's most trusted interviewer, sensed that this conversation would be different. "Ladies and gentlemen," Oprah announced, "I want you to meet someone truly extraordinary. For 30 years, Barbara Henderson has opened her home and her heart to children in crisis. 47 children have called her mom, and each one has been transformed by her love." Barbara stood slowly, using the arm of her chair for support, and walked to the interview area. Despite the tremor in her hands and the uncertainty that came with her diagnosis, she moved with the dignity of someone who had spent decades being a safe harbor for frightened children. As they settled into their chairs, Oprah noticed the envelope Barbara clutched like a lifeline. "Barbara," Oprah began, 30 years of fostering 47 children. What made you choose this path?" Barbara's voice was steady, despite the emotion in her eyes. "I didn't choose fostering, Oprah. Fostering chose me. After my daughter Lisa died, I thought my heart was too broken to love anyone else. But I learned that broken hearts don't close, they expand. They make room for more love, not less. Tell us about some of these children, Oprah encouraged. Barbara's face lit up as she began to share stories. Marcus, who taught her that silence didn't mean absence. Sarah, who showed her that trust could be rebuilt even after betrayal. Miguel, who proved that love spoke every language. The twins, who demonstrated that healing could happen even in the midst of loss. But it was when she spoke of James that her voice took on a different quality, deeper, richer, filled with the kind of pride that comes from witnessing miracles. James came to us when he was 7, Barbara said. He had been labeled unadoptable, dangerous, beyond help, but I saw a little boy who was drowning in grief and guilt, who needed someone to throw him a rope instead of pushing him further underwater. Where is James now? Oprah asked. Barbara's smile could have powered the entire studio. He's a pediatric resident at Chicago Children's Hospital. He's getting married next month to a wonderful woman named Maria, and he's planning to foster children himself. That's when Barbara's hands began to tremble more noticeably, and she gripped the envelope tighter. Oprah, she said, her voice taking on an urgency that hadn't been there before. I need to tell you something. 3 months ago, I was diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's disease. The studio fell silent. Oprah's expression shifted from surprise to compassion to understanding. That's why I'm here today, Barbara continued. Not just to be honored, but to a gift. The most important gift I've ever given. She held up the envelope with shaking hands. This contains letters, 47 letters I've written to each of my children. Letters telling them how proud I am, how much they've meant to me, how much they've taught me about courage and resilience and love. Oprah's eyes were already filling with tears. Barbara, but there's one letter that's different, Barbara interrupted gently. One letter to one very special young man who thinks he owes me everything, when the truth is, I owe him everything, and I want to give it to him now while I still remember every word. That's when Barbara did something that stopped Oprah mid-breath. She stood up, walked to the edge of the stage, and called out to the audience. James Rodriguez Henderson, I know you're out there. Dr. Chen told me you took the day off to watch your old mom on television. Come up here, son, I have something for you. The cameras swiveled toward the audience, searching, until they found a young man in the 10th row, rising slowly to his feet. James Rodriguez Henderson, at 25, was tall and lean, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the gentle hands of someone who had chosen to heal rather than harm. He was wearing scrubs underneath a hastily thrown-on jacket, having rushed from the hospital to watch the woman who had saved his life receive the recognition she deserved. As James made his way down the aisle, past audience members who were already wiping their eyes, the cameras caught his expression, a mixture of love, concern, and growing understanding that this moment was about more than celebration. When he reached the stage, Barbara met him with an embrace that spoke of 30 years of love condensed into a single moment. Mom, James whispered, and in that one word was everything. Gratitude, love, worry, the kind of devotion that comes from being saved by someone who refused to give up. Sit with me, son, Barbara said, guiding him to a chair that had been quickly brought out. I have something to tell you, something I need you to hear while I still have all the words. Oprah, recognizing that she was witnessing something, stepped back slightly, becoming less of an interviewer and more of a witness to a moment that transcended television. Barbara opened the envelope with trembling fingers and pulled out a letter written in her careful handwriting. The same handwriting that had packed lunch notes for 47 children over 30 years. James, she began reading, her voice steady despite the magnitude of what she was sharing. I am writing this letter while I still remember everything. Every moment of your childhood, every breakthrough, every time you made me proud, and son, you have made me proud, every single day for 18 years. James was crying now, understanding beginning to dawn on his face. You came to us broken, and angry and convinced that love was a luxury you couldn't afford. Barbara continued. But you taught me something I had never learned in all my years of fostering. You taught me that the children who are hardest to love are the ones who need it most desperately. She paused, looking directly into his eyes rather than at the letter. You think you owe me your life, James. You think I saved you. But the truth is, you saved me. When Lisa died, I thought my purpose as a mother had died with her. You showed me that motherhood isn't about biology. It's about choice. Every day, I chose to love you, and every day you chose to let me. The studio was completely silent now, 300 people holding their breath as they witnessed a mother's final gift to her son. I need you to promise me something, Barbara said, folding the letter carefully. Promise me that when my mind starts to forget, you'll remember for both of us. Remember that love doesn't end when memory fails. Remember that the 47 children who called me mom were the greatest blessing of my life. Remember that every single one of them, including you, taught me something about courage. James could barely speak through his tears. Mom, I promise. But you're gonna be okay. The treatment. James, Barbara interrupted gently. I need you to be my doctor right now. Tell me the truth about early-stage Alzheimer's. James's medical training warred with his heart, but the honesty his foster mother had taught him won out. It's progressive, Mom. We can slow it down, but we can't stop it. Barbara nodded, having already known the answer. Then we make the time we have count, and we make sure that the legacy of love we've built together doesn't end with my memory. That's when she turned to Oprah and the cameras, her voice taking on the strength that had sustained her through 30 years of loving broken children. Oprah, I want to ask you something, and I want to ask everyone watching. There are 500,000 children in foster care in America right now. 500,000 children who are waiting for someone to choose them, to love them, to show them that their past doesn't define their future. She stood up slowly, James rising to support her. I won't remember their faces much longer. But I remember this. Every single child who came through our door taught us something about resilience, about hope, about the human capacity to heal. They weren't broken children who needed fixing. They were wounded children who needed love. Barbara walked to center stage, James beside her, and addressed the camera directly. If my story has touched you, don't just feel sad for me. Feel inspired by them. By Marcus and Sarah and Miguel and Jessica and Jennifer and all the others. Feel inspired enough to open your heart to a child who needs what you have to give. That's when something unprecedented happened. From the audience, a voice called out, Mrs. Henderson. Everyone turned to see a young woman standing in the 5th row. Sarah, now 24, a social worker herself, having flown in from Denver when she heard about Barbara's appearance on the show. Sarah? Barbara's face lit up with recognition and joy. One by one, more voices called out from the audience. Marcus, now 31 and a teacher. Miguel, 26 and a translator for immigrant families. Jessica and Jennifer, both nurses, both married, both mothers themselves. They had come, somehow, to honor the woman who had shown them that love could exist even after loss. That families could be built from choice rather than genetics. That healing was possible even when brokenness seemed permanent. As former foster children filed onto the stage, each one embracing Barbara, each one whispering thanks for specific memories, specific moments when she had chosen love over convenience, patience over frustration, hope over despair. Oprah stood witnessing something she had never seen in 30 years of television. This wasn't just a reunion. This was a testimony to the multiplicative power of love. How one woman's choice to open her heart after devastating loss had created ripples that would continue long after her memory failed. Barbara, Oprah said, her voice thick with emotion, you said James taught you that the children who are hardest to love need it most. What would you want people to know about fostering? Barbara, surrounded by the living proof of love's power, smiled with the wisdom of someone who had learned life's most important lesson. I would want them to know that you don't have to be perfect to be a foster parent. You don't have to have all the answers or unlimited resources, or a pain-free past. You just have to be willing to love imperfectly, consistently, and without expecting anything in return. She looked around at the faces surrounding her. James, Sarah, Marcus, Miguel, the twins, and so many others. These children taught me that love isn't diminished when it's shared. It multiplies. Every child who called me mom didn't take love away from Lisa's memory. They honored it. They proved that love is the one thing that grows when you give it away. James stepped forward then, taking his foster mother's hand. "Mom," he said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had found his calling, "I promise you that your legacy won't end with your memory. Maria and we're going to foster children. We're going to love them the way you loved us. We're going to show them that broken doesn't mean worthless, that past doesn't determine future, that family is something you build with choice and commitment." The other former foster children nodded in agreement, a chain of love stretching forward into futures that would honor the woman who had shown them how to heal. As the show concluded, Barbara Henderson stood surrounded by 47 reasons why love matters, why choosing hope over despair makes a difference, why one person's courage to love despite loss can change the trajectory of countless lives. The envelope she had brought contained 47 letters, but the greatest letter had been written, not in words but in lives. Lives that would continue Barbara's legacy long after Alzheimer's claimed her memories. Because love, as Barbara Henderson had learned and taught, doesn't require memory to continue. It only requires the willingness to choose, again and again, to see the possibility of healing in every broken heart that crosses your path. The last words spoken on that stage came from James, the angry 7-year-old, who had become a ailer himself. "Thank you, Mom, for teaching us that love is not a feeling. Love is a decision. And because you made that decision 47 times, the world is forever changed."